Welcome to the bold analysis. Tanzania President Samia Suluhu claiming an 80% win in a general election. An election that was marred with protests, massive boycott, or rather nationwide boycott, opposition blocked from participating, is a mockery of democracy, defiling that nation's stability. And in this podcast, I believe and I argue that Kenya, led by President Ruto, should not validate or authenticate such a charade from Tanzania. And I was really shocked when I saw the electoral body there declaring Samia Suluhu the president. And in this podcast, we are going to look at behind the scene diplomatic negotiations. And really, Kenya must tread very careful. First, kindly subscribe to our channel, click the notification bell and like our videos. And if you want to understand the politics of the country at this moment, this is your podcast, because here we give it time, we dig deep, so that by the time we bring it to you, we bring a 360 perspective as far as our political analysis is concerned. I continue to say thank you very much for supporting us to build a house for Bildad and the children in Migori. David and the team, David is still there. So I'll still be giving you an update. It is on our plan that because there are two houses, if the construction can be done, so that by next Sunday, we can also move there and support, or rather officially hand over the two houses. And also, apart from that, we are now planning the other bit that we'll do is to support the children to pay fees and open up a business for Bildad. So if you still want to support, you can also reach out. Tanzanian electoral body announced the results in a short brief when internet was restored, results announced, and then reblocked immediately after that announcement.
Na Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan wa CCM alipata kura milioni 31,913,866 sawa na 97.66. Hivyo kwa kuzingatia masharti ya ibara ya 41 ibara ndogo ya 6 ya Katiba ya Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania ya mwaka 1977, ikisoma pamoja na kifungu cha 45 kidogo cha 9 na 10 cha sheria ya uchaguzi wa rais, wa bunge na madiwani, sheria namba 1 ya mwaka 2024, na kanuni ya 57 ndogo ya 4C ya kanuni za uchaguzi wa rais, wa bunge na madiwani za mwaka 2025, na mtangaza Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan kwamba amechaguliwa kuwa rais wa Jamhuri ya Muungano wa Tanzania kupitia Chama cha Mapinduzi CCM.
And you can feel, I'm yet to see even, how can you win an election? And by the way, Tanzanians ni wengi, they had 37 million registered voters. That election where I did not see people lining up, I did not see the mood. Is it can it be a coincidence that a president wins, 34 million people vote for you, and the country is burning in almost all parts of the country? Is it? I think ordinarily we would have seen a confrontation. There is no doubt that the Tanzanian election was a big fraud. And I was just following up. Do you know that in their constitution, after results are announced, you're not allowed to go and challenge them. There is no court that can litigate presidential results in Tanzania. Unlike here in Kenya, our, we also need to take our own pride. At least we have, yes, people have gotten away with how they beat the system, but at least you have a latitude to go to Supreme Court to challenge presidential results. At some point it has worked, at some point it has always failed, but at least it is there, and the Constitution allows it. In Tanzania, after these results are announced, you cannot go to challenge them. Look at how, like that electoral body, immediately results are announced, there is the closure of it. And I don't know how then they're going to litigate about it. Yesterday, on Friday evening, Jakaya Kikwete, the former president who is in Kenya, was reported to have met Uhuru Kenyatta, and just looking at the situation there. And then there was another report that Samia Suluhu is reported to have had a phone conversation with President William Ruto here and Yoweri Kaguta Museveni from Uganda over the escalating tension in the TENSED. Of course, this is the time the East African community is at test. And I saw that report that emerged by Kenyan's the CEO, that was really came out by Kenyan's by CEO. But even though the president of Kenya, the State House in Kenya were yet to release any statement or any discussion on that, despite the fact that this is a matter of public interest. It will be in the interest of Kenyans to understand what their president is saying about the Tanzanian issue. But in this podcast, I strongly believe that looking at the situation in Tanzania, if this is how that country is burning, if it is true, sometimes I don't buy what opposition sometimes says, but this is what Chadema are reporting, that over 700 people have been killed. I don't believe it's 700, but I think the point is, it doesn't matter the number. So many people have been killed in those protests. But of course, with the internet shut down in the East African country, it has become even difficult for human rights bodies to gather evidence and to gather information on what's happening in that country. Journalists have been detained. The doctors in the hospitals have been restrained and they cannot give any information on casualties or deaths. Human rights organizations are not even allowed to move from one place to the other to gather information on what's happening there. So it's a very dark day for Tanzania. Now, just a glimpse of what is happening. It is reported that since the election happened, or rather since the protests started and the tension escalated, Samia Suluhu is consulting the regional leaders, William Ruto and Museveni, and political figures on the best way to approach and handle the current political situation. And according to this report, almost all her political advisors and president's colleagues in the East African community are saying that he should consider releasing the opposition leader Tundu Lissu as a gesture towards the national reconciliation. But one riddle around it is Yoweri Kaguta Museveni is the only one who is against such, but this intel could also be, you cannot dispute it, because just like in Tanzania where Museveni jailed, where Tundu Lissu jailed the opposition, even in Uganda, the opposition leader Kizza Besigye has been in jail for some time. After he was picked by security agencies from Nairobi here, of course, the team from Uganda came, picked him in a Nairobi hotel, and he was taken to Uganda and jailed in a military court. So we understand that according to this intel that Museveni is against the decision to release Tundu Lissu, while Tundu Lissu release from the prison could be one of the steps to maybe achieve reconciliation. Days to the general election, Tundu Lissu was released from the prison, but he decided not to leave. He was against that decision and was still detained. And I think that was the right decision, because let me tell you, at the moment, if Tundu Lissu was out, I think the state would have put the blame on him that he is the person that funded, organized, and even coordinated the protests on that end. So the fact that he is on prison and people are protesting makes the Tanzania revolt very organic and not really pushed entirely by the political forces within the country. There are also reports, and this people should be very careful about, that some East African countries, including Kenya and Uganda, have special forces in Tanzania, and these forces are said to go there to help evacuate dignitaries stuck in various places in Tanzania. But there seems to be more questions that need to be asked at this point, because you need to understand that this election, since the protest started, there are videos of Kenyans who are trying to cross through the Namanga border and the Isebania border to join their Gen Z colleagues in Tanzania. And the reports that there are quite a number of Kenyans that have also been killed there. And the Kenya needs really to get it right at this point. I've been seeing a bit of silence from the Nairobi team, diplomatic team, and the closest we've had is the PS, Interior Security Principal Secretary Raymond Omolo, trying to ask Kenyans to avoid crossing over to the other end. And really, this is something that I think we cannot afford to be silent about, if indeed some of us are getting killed, trapped in that country.
Miss Suluhu, a hijabi Muslim woman from a small village in Tanzania who had no hope of ever being president of Tanzania, who was absolutely ignored as the deputy president. She was given no work. She was at her office. She did nothing. Magufuli went around the country fighting corruption, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. Everybody in Africa thinks that Magufuli was assassinated. Nobody has any evidence. But every time there's a leader who's trying to do something, Magafuli's got his problem. You know, he was locking people up because he wanted to do what he wanted to do, but it's not excusable. But he was fighting corruption in such a tremendous way that he chased the IMF out of Tanzania.
Indeed, he did, and started to insist on proper governance.
Yes,
on whatever level.
Now, I am a Muslim like Ms. Sulu, mm-hmm. But our faith, our personal issue, has nothing to do with her practice as the president of Tanzania.
If Kenya congratulates Suluhu for that sham election, it will be detrimental for our reputation as a country. How can you comfortably take pride in an election where approximately over 100 people are reported to have been killed by a regime? Suluhu is also said to have kept Western embassies in the dark over her next steps, with reports indicating there has been no contact between the government and the Western embassies there. And I don't know why, to me, that is not even news. Because the Western embassies that have been there, they've done less. Suluhu has been in prison for the last 6 months, I think 8 months, and they've been quiet. Martha Karua even left Kenya to go and try to defend Tundu Lissu in parliament, in court. She was deported, and we didn't see them conspicuously condemning that. Kenya should at this point consider denouncing its ties with the country, since it's very embarrassing to see some of the bloggers from the country running some PR exercise for Samia Suluhu.
Kama unataka kumnyima kura Dr. Samia, jambo la kwanza, usiende hospitali. Jambo la pili, usipite kwenye barabara yetu. Jambo la tatu, usipande SGR. Jambo la nne, waombe TANESCO wanyofoe umeme nyumbani kwako. Huwezi kuishi kwa matunda ambayo Dr. Samia ameyaleta, alafu mwishoni unamsaliti kwa kutokumpa kura.
Asante sana kwa Mwenyezi Mungu kutupa nafasi nyingine, lakini ningependa nimwambie mama yetu, mama Afrika Mashariki, mama mchapakazi, mama Samia Suluhu, mimi pamoja na nyumba yangu, mimi pamoja na mke wangu ambaye anaitwa Samia Muna, tunakupenda sana mama, tunakupenda sana 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 sana. Na pia nikuletea ujumbe kutoka kwa wale wa Tanzania ambao ni wengi, they called the silent majority, ambao wameongea tu na wamenyamaza, walitoka jana wakaenda kupiga kura, wameniambia tafadhali enda kamwambie mama tunampenda, tuko na yeye, tuko pamoja naye. Na mama, sijajua unapendwa hivyo not only in Tanzania but Afrika Mashariki. Watu wanasema kwamba mwambie mama tunampenda. Niko Ulaya sasa hivi na bado naambiwa ambia mama tunampenda. Yote sana ni ya kwamba mama unabaki kuwa mama. Asante sana kwa kuwa kiongozi bora, ambao ni kiongozi mwenye hekima na busara, kiongozi ambao ni mcha Mungu, na sisi kwa pamoja tunakuombea ushindi kubwa sana. Tunakuombea ushindi kubwa, tunakuombea Mungu akupe ushindi kubwa, kwa sababu mimi na mke wangu pamoja na wale ambao they called the silent majority tayari tunangojea tukusherekea.
And Kasipul is told to be hiding. I think there was a call to one of the radio stations where he was saying that he's been forced out to go and take some time out in take some time out in Dubai because of his stand on Samia Suluhu. Kenya must avoid the temptation to create a safe haven for some of these wild butchers and some of these villains in the country. And of course, in the context of the Tanzanian upheaval, there is this video of President embracing Hemedi, the RFS reader from Sudan, and telling him, "Welcome to Kenya, your second home," has sparked outrage on our integrity in terms of pushing for diplomatic peace.
My good brother. Welcome, 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 welcome. Welcome to your other home. Thank you very much. Again, welcome to Nairobi.
Kimbia.
He's also very happy for that section. Yes. So I'm very happy to receive you again in Nairobi. I know this is not the first time.
Cross-border totalitarianism, that South Sudanese dissidents will be arrested in Nairobi and be handed to the government of Salva Kiir for incarceration, that Kizza Besigye will be arrested in Kenya and be handed to Yoweri Museveni to deal with howsoever he may wish. And irony of ironies, that he is abducted not by the Kenya police, but by security forces from Uganda,
on Kenyan
defiling Kenyan soil and sovereignty. They should even have told Yoweri, let us do it for you and bring him to you. Abuse of our sovereignty.
William,
it is not as business as usual. Leo tuachane na siasa. Leo tuongee mimi na wewe kama wazazi. William, you dined with wale wakubwa wa RSF. Wewe ulikula chakula vizuri na meza moja na ule jamaa mkubwa wa RSF, ile kikundi ya Janjaweed Malisha, ile inaua watu Somali, Sudan sai. Ukienda kwa X, tafuta killings in Darfur, utalia machozi. Na mtu mwenye aliua anaua watu ni ule mliongea na yeye, mkafanya urafiki na yeye, mkafanya biashara na yeye, na mkakaa kwa meza moja. Sasa hata mnaongea pamoja. Ako na namba yako, uko na namba yake. What do you think? Sasa hii Sudan tukiongea hivi, wamama wananyimwa chakula for 5 days. Wakionekana hawajakufa, wanakuja kuuliwa na RSF wenye mlikula na yeye kwa meza moja, mwenye mnafanya biashara na yeye pamoja. What comes nini ninakuja kwa akili yako, Rais William? Kama mimi ni wewe, ningejitoa kwa kitambo sana. Kwa sababu how comes watu ukiona vile wanateseka, ukiona vile wanalia, watu wenye una support, wenye unaita RSF, wenye ulikuwa una support wajenge serikali yao, wanaua watu. Sasa watu wakiuawa wote, watu wenye wanataka kuungwa mkono waingie kwa serikali, wataongoza nani?
Political peace is very important, but it comes more handy, it comes more organic and more significant if that peace is served with justice. You cannot have an injustice, and after an injustice, you only now transition to peace. And I've been seeing one leaders, of course some people talking about the need for peace in Tanzania. And yes, we cannot underestimate, of course we cannot underscore the need for peace. But that also comes clearly with justice. And this is where African leaders get it wrong. We seem to talk about peace, but we cannot see the injustice in it. We cannot see the injustice. The reason why there are things that Tanzania must get in terms of even their constitution. How can you have an election where you block everyone? Protesters have accused the government of undermining democracy, as the main opposition leader Tundu Lissu remains in jail, and another key opposition figure was disqualified from the election just to bolster the chances of Suluhu winning that election. As in, how do you put yourself at 98%, even if you're looking for legitimacy? You know, it's something very unrealistic. Since Wednesdays, protesters have engaged police in running battles, with Tanzanian police firing tear gas and live bullets to disperse them. I strongly believe that Kenya should consider denouncing its ties with Uganda, and even if not denouncing, but of course cannot validate the charade happening there. I saw a response from Anthony Guterres, the UN Secretary General, saying, deeply concerned by the situation in Tanzania, including the reports of deaths and injuries during demonstrations, I call on all to exercise restraint, reject violence, and engage in inclusive and constructive dialogue to prevent further escalation. The UN stands ready to support efforts aimed at fostering dialogue, strengthening democratic governance, and promoting sustainable peace in Tanzania. And this is what I was just saying. You know, you cannot be putting such a diplomatic and corporate language, trying to pamper and babysit a political villain that come clothed as a sitting president. And I believe that in this post, Anthony Guterres should not have shied away from calling out Samia Suluhu. Because what Suluhu has done in Tanzania is not worth anyone's admiration. No one can admire that. And it really needs to be condemned in totality. Not saying, you know, dialogue, you know, reports on demonstrations. So, from Anthony Guterres' eyes, from the diplomatic, and that's why I say these diplomatic missions in this country sometimes, you know, they can't change, they can't do much. Anthony Guterres cannot regret the fact that the demonstrations and the killings have come from defiling the fabric of the Tanzanian constitution, because that seemed to have been, that is what is at the center of that. ANC has also directly dismissed the Tanzanian elections in a strongly worded statement they have issued on election results. But then there was an election in Tanzania. I'm looking for if you have any statement from an East African observer mission. East African community has a custom of sending observers to watch elections there. I don't know how Museveni and President Ruto would actually stand at a position of advising Suluhu or a position of sending special forces to, you know, to pull out dignitaries that are stuck in Tanzania, while their observer missions, you know, the sitting chairman of the East African community now is President Ruto, unless he was changed, I don't know, but the last time it was confirmed this year it was him. They did not even call out the Tanzanian authorities from blocking the East African observer mission. I think Suluhu is a big coward, draped in very, you know, in commando suits. It's not something that is here. Now, why do I think that the President Ruto must not validate the Tanzanian charade? And Kenya must stand at a position of, must stand at a neutral position of watching what happens. Of course, number one here is the country is looking at the East African community as its first mediation team. The way things go, we stand, I don't know whether we, but the East African community then stands as the immediate friend to mediate. But I don't think whether we have the neutrality to do that. But this is my strong reason why I think we must be very careful. Cheering that sham election where Suluhu has announced the president will spiral to Nairobi, putting Kenyans, even living in Tanzania, some hostility. Kenyans living in Tanzania, and there are quite a number of them, they've really been telling us about how the situation is there, they will face hostility. And there are so many Tanzanians also living in Kenya who really regret, the Kenyans living in Kenya, paying taxes and doing business here, that will really regret that. And it can spiral. Did you see Kenyans crossing the border to Tanzania? And I believe in part of the conversation where the Suluhu had with the president is restrained to ensure that the protest spillover does not happen. I saw another tweet that also asking the Zambian authorities not to allow Uganda to sneak in some of their soldiers to Tanzania through Zambia. I don't know how that has not been confirmed though, but there are just some other reports. The perception of the East African dictatorship enterprise is going to kill this region if it is not checked. If today Ruto and Museveni are to okay and validate Tanzanians, that mock election in Tanzania, then that will be the start of making of a dictatorship enterprise. And that dictatorship enterprise will face hostility from the election, from the electorates. And I'm telling you, Kenyans are watching what's happening in Tanzania. They're watching keenly because they want to see how it goes. Tanzania are taking it down. The other reason here is, in Kenya, the Kenya Kwanza has already faced enough condemnation on violation of human rights. We've had protests where people have been killed. And this has profiled Kenya Kwanza as a regime that is insensitive to killings, that is insensitive to violation of human rights, the abductions and arbitrary arrests. So if we at this point, we also move a notch higher to support whatever we support Suluhu at this point, then it only means that we are progressing. We are progressing what we've been doing here. And that will continue to hurt our reputation. The country, the East African country, is at crossroads. It is asking for a voice of reason. It is asking for a voice that will speak to its need for peace, but at the same time, make sure that it is conjoined with the need for justice. And we continue to pray for Tanzania that will get out of it. Happy new month of November. This is the first day of November. If you're asking an update about our project in Migori, it is continuing. We remain with the last bit, which will only be to open a business for him and also pay fees for the children. But we'll put that later after the two houses are built. Thank you.